What time is it? What time is it? What time is it? It is time for reparations. I'm going to tell you about it in just a few minutes. Stay with me. It is time. It is time. It is time for reparations. It's time. It's reckoning time. It is time for reparations. It is time for reparations. It is time for reparations. That's what I'm talking about. And I got to stress it, because you're probably not hearing a lot about how reparations are being discussed and talked about around the country. So I gotta keep you in the loop, because some powerful things are going on where reparations are concerned. Hello, my name is Augustus Corbett. I am a lawyer and a minister here in the Dallas area. Every Saturday, sometimes during the week, my daughter and I come and we provide a legal analysis of trending politics, policies, personalities, pop culture, to empower you with the information you need to defy an unjust legal system. We do it every Saturday, and we'll pop up on you during the week. That's what we're doing now. If you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Yes, because we put forth some very powerful stuff. Well, today is historic for three reasons. Number one, it's historic because sadly and unfortunately, this is the day that Dr. King was assassinated. And that's another reason why I'm on today. But it's historical for another reason, and that is Donald Trump today was arrested and booked. That's big because Mr. Trump is the first former president to have been arrested and booked in. So, he's now facing 34 felony counts from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and we'll see how that goes. We just got to see what happens with that. And it's historic for another reason, and this is the most important reason, because today, 29 years ago, my son, Caleb Corbett, was born. Caleb Joshua Corbett. I picked his name. My wife allowed me to do it myself, and I use the names of my two favorite Old Testament characters, Caleb and Joshua. And so he's Caleb Joshua Corbett. 29 years ago today, he was born. And guess what? 2 days from now, he's getting married. So I'm shouting out my son today. Yes, his birthday, and he'll be stepping into the marriage lifestyle in just a couple of days. So help me celebrate the birthday of my only son, Caleb Joshua Corbett. Reckoning. It is time for reparations. I'm not going to take a long time. Now, I say that, and sometimes I end up going longer than I had anticipated because it starts getting good. But my goal is to try and get through. I got about 10 or 11 slides. I can't seem to get up here without some slides because I'm trying to educate you. This is not about entertainment. This is not hype. This is not hip hop. This is giving you something to feed you, like I said in the introduction, to empower you to defy an unjust legal system. All right. And I am one half of the Defiant Lawyers. So that's what we do. We defy this legal system each and every day. We defy this legal system. All right. And I'm empowering you to do the same. Okay. Let's get into it. Reparations. It's time. It is time. It is reckoning time. Okay, so let's just kind of walk through this. Again, I'm not going to be very long. I want to show you first and foremost that reparations has a spiritual or scriptural basis. There are many scriptures that I can read to show you that, but I selected 5 scriptures out of the book of James. Remember, I'm an attorney, but I'm also a minister. So I know the Bible. I don't just know the law. I know the Bible, which is a powerful combination to know the Word of God and to know the law, to know the laws of man, and then to know the laws of God. What a powerful combination. I am so honored that God chose me to become both, actually. All right, they help me empower my community. All right, James chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. This tells us, first and foremost, that rich folks, especially those who've gotten their wealth unjustly, misery is coming for them. James goes on to say, your gold and your silver have rusted, and their rust will be a witness against you and will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, who did your work, which has been withheld by you, cries out against you, and the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, the pay, the money, which has been withheld by you. We, for 250 years, provided the labor in this country, and we did not get paid for that work. And then we suffered further injustices because even after slavery was abolished, Jim Crow was implemented, which then segregated and relegated us to a place of second-class citizenship. We couldn't vote. We couldn't live in certain communities. We couldn't get certain jobs. We were, in essence, still in a form of slavery. And as a result of that, we were impoverished. We were oppressed. We were subdued and subjugated. So that's what this verse is saying. The pay, the money, the wages of the laborers, in our case, the enslaved, who mowed your fields, who picked your cotton, and which has been withheld by you, cries out against you. That pay cries out against you, enslaver. You see, just because it looks like a wrong has gone unpunished and uncompensated doesn't mean it's gone. We may have forgot it. You may have forgot it. The wrongdoer may have forgot it, but God hasn't. He goes on to say, and the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. That says to us that those of us and our ancestors who have been enslaved and defrauded and oppressed, our cries have reached up to God. And what needs to happen now is there need to be a reckoning, and there needs to be reparations. And it can't be stopped. It's going to happen. And it's actually happening around the country, okay? It's actually happening around the country. You have lived luxuriously on the earth and led a life of wanton pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. He does not resist you. So, this scripture here in the New Testament, the book of James, says, you read it with me, that those folks who defrauded us and enslaved us and stole from us, our cries have reached the ears and the heart of the Lord. And he's going to avenge us. Remember when God brought Israel out of Egyptian bondage? He brought them out with reparations. Our payment hasn't reached our hands yet, but it's coming. That's what Dr. King, that's why he was killed. He went to the Washington Monument and he said, I have a dream. I have a dream. And that's what people focus on, the dream. But before that, he talked about how the country had wrote a check to us and the check bounced. They promised us 40 acres and a mule. We never got payment. We scraped and struggled to get our hands on land. They took it from us. They have done all sorts of injustice to us. But a reckoning is coming. Reparations is the only way to solve America's race issues. Reparations. I'm here to tell you. Let's read this. This comes out of a book entitled From Here to Equality. You ought to get that book. It's about reparations. One of the best books, I think the best, probably the authority on reparations in this country. Well, here's an excerpt. It says, the world has never seen any people turn loose to such destruction as were the 4 million slaves of the South. They were free without roofs to cover them, or bread to eat, or land to cultivate, and as a consequence died in such numbers as to awaken the hopes of their enemies that they would soon disappear. These are the words of Frederick Douglass, celebrating the past, anticipating the future, a speech that he gave in 1875. And he is calling attention to the way African Americans were, yes, freed from slavery, but given nothing to survive. They were hoping, as Frederick Douglass said, we would just die out from starvation, from poverty, etc. But no, we didn't die out. Like the children of Israel, the more they oppressed us, the more we rose. And now it's time to get paid. It's time to get paid because they freed us, but then they left us destitute. They told us, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. But we didn't have boots. We didn't have straps. We had nothing, literally nothing. This is the story of my family. I've done my family research. My family was enslaved by a family where I'm from. The name of that family, the Williams family. My family's last name is Williams, and that's where we got it from. And once slavery was abolished, my family just continued to stay and work for this white family. And again, basically destitute. From when slavery ended, my family then started sharecropping for this family. And they robbed us. They robbed my family. They robbed my great-great-grandfather. They robbed my great-grandfather. They robbed my grandfather. They robbed my grandmother. They robbed us, pure and simple. And they robbed most African Americans. There's nothing wrong with us psychologically. There's nothing wrong with us intellectually. We're not inferior. God didn't make anyone inferior. The reason why We still, after 400 years in this country, only own 4%. About 3% of this nation's wealth is because of the oppression and the robbery and the racism, the white supremacy of this nation. And that's not victimhood to point out the facts. Those are the facts. It's not victimhood to point out the facts. That's what black and white conservatives will say. If you point out the fact that we didn't get our 40 acres and a mule, if we point out the fact that we were enslaved for 250 years, if we point out the fact that we were segregated and relegated to second-class citizenship, couldn't vote, if we point out those facts, conservatives say we're playing the victim card. Well, they can say what they want to say. They can say what they want to say. They can gaslight us if they want to. But those of us who have studied these issues and who are intelligent, we know that we are being gaslighted, and we reject that. We reject it. Why reparations? Because, as Frederick Douglass said, it was shameful the way that they, yes, ended slavery after a brutal war. We had to force them to end slavery. But they did so in such a way that they knew we would still be basically slaves, but called something else. Why reparations? Professor Doherty says racism and discrimination have perpetually crippled black economic opportunities. At several historic moments, the trajectory of racial inequality could have been altered dramatically, but at each juncture, the road chosen did not lead to a just and fair America. Why reparations? Because today, using data from the Survey of Consumer Finances, researchers at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis find that the median white family had $184,000 in wealth in 2019, just 4 years ago, compared to just $38,000 and $23,000 for medium Hispanic and black families, respectively. So while whites have $184,000 in wealth, white families, the average white family, the median white family, the median black family has only $23,000 in wealth. We have less than Latinos, many of whom have not been here as long as we have, who also did not provide the labor the first 2.5 centuries of this country that gave this country its wealth. Yet we only have $23,000 in wealth for the median black family. That's by design. And the only way to close that gap is with reparations. They owe us that money. That's our money. So if you go to work this week or in next week and the week after that and you don't get a paycheck, what are you going to do? You're going to cry out. You're going to protest. You're going to demand that you get your money. That's what we need to be doing, because otherwise we will never close this gap. As a matter of fact, income and wealth for African Americans is decreasing. Some economists are predicting that the average black family will have zero wealth in the next 30 or 40 years. Reparations is the only way to close that gap. Now, here's a chart. Look at it. The income of white families across the top, the blue line. Look at that huge gap between the Latino families, black families, and other families. And this has existed for all these years because of the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, and systemic racism today. Anytime You enslave people for 250 years and write in the law that those people are chattel property. They are things, as Dr. King said, they are thingified. They thingified us. We were not treated with the dignity of a human being made in the image of God. We were created, we were treated like and codified in the law as things, as 3/5 humans. And then we, by God's grace, with the help of some white abolitionists, we finally was able to overcome slavery. But then they withheld all the money that we had built and made for them. They denied us that and sent us on our way penniless. And they then started writing laws and doing all other sorts of trickery and mastery to make sure that we stay penniless. I know that there are some rich blacks. I know that you got some billionaires out there, but you take all the wealth of the richest black folks and put it together, it represents way less than 1% of the wealth of even, say, Walmart. So don't get caught up in the fact that some blacks are wealthy. Go back and listen to a series that I did. Go to my church's website, my church's YouTube channel, Saltmakers Church. I did about an 8 or 9 week message on why African Americans have no wealth in this nation. And you'll see why this gap exists. Some folks would try to tell us that the gap exists because we don't work hard, because we're not intelligent. All those are lies. This is not complicated. This is not rocket science. Take any group of people, and enslave them for 2.5 centuries, and then free them with nothing, and then continue to degrade and do everything you can to keep wealth away from those people, and they'll end up in the same place that we are. It's what happened to the Jewish people. Now, they are many of them fabulously rich today, but it goes directly back to, again, the fact that when God freed the Jews, he told them, go read the Bible, he told them to go back to their enslavers and ask them for gold. And by the time the Lord finished with the Egyptians by sending all those plagues, the Egyptians gladly gave much gold to Israel as they were leaving Egyptian bondage. So that gave them something to build on. We didn't have that. And then when we scraped up what we could scrape up and bought some land, and I talk about land because there's no greater asset to own than land. We were able to put together much land, many acres of land, and over the years they stole that from us. We'll do reparations. It's a reckoning time. Who profited and profits from black oppression? The U.S. government, states, banks, corporations, universities like Harvard, Brown, etc., and many others, according to Duke Professor William Darity. They are the ones who profited. In other words, this country has profited. Let me share a quick story with you. A family contacted my law office to represent them because they own land that has lots of minerals under that land, lots of oil and gas. The great-great-grandfather of this family purchased land here in Texas, and you know here in Texas there's a lot of oil and gas. It just so happened that this black man back in the 30s purchased land that had lots and lots and lots of oil under it. I went to visit this family, and this family, again, sits on this land, but the family has no wealth. So you say, how in the world does a family that sits on oil and gas in Texas have no wealth? Because whites in the 30s tricked their great-great-grandfather to enter oil leases that are that were in place for 99 years. I'm not lying to you. I'm telling you. I went and visited the oil fields, and coming out of this black family's land, on their land, were Exxon trucks and these other petroleum trucks coming out back and forth off their land. And they told me they may get a royalty check for 64 cents, $1.10. Where's all that money going? It's going to so many different people, but not to the black family that owns the land, because they showed me the paperwork. When their great-great-grandfather bought the land, he was illiterate, and they tricked him into signing leases that last 100 years. That was 1930. Those leases will run out in the next 10 years, but over the last 100 years, white families have built tremendous wealth off these people's minerals because they took advantage of an elderly black man, and the court paperwork said that the black man was not only illiterate, but he had a mental deficiency. And you tell me, there are stories like that over and over and over and over and over again in this country. I mean, black folks who have just been defrauded, just stolen, just taken advantage of. There are stories like that over and over and over and over again that I can tell you about. Every time I see, for example, a story of a black man going to prison 30 years for a crime he hasn't done, it's heartbreaking. And there are probably thousands of other black men in prison just like that because of corrupt prosecutors and police officers and sheriffs and judges and jury members. Yes, we deserve reparation, and that is not victimhood. What are reparations? Professor Doherty says reparations are a program of acknowledgement, redress, and closure for a grievous injustice. Where African Americans are concerned, the grievous injustices that make the case for reparations include slavery, legal segregation, which is Jim Crow, and ongoing discrimination and stigmatization. So Professor Doherty defines reparation as a program of acknowledgement. Acknowledge, first and foremost, acknowledge the wrong done. This country hasn't even done that. It hasn't even done that. This country has not. We just, over the past couple of years ago, got an anti-lynching bill passed. And there are still slave clauses to this day in the Constitution. I mean, really, it's still in the Constitution to this day. Some states, I think Louisiana, still had a slave clause in their state constitution, in their state law. It's amazing what we have dealt with. It's the kind of stuff that we have dealt with is indescribable. And it's painful to talk about. It's painful to hear. And most African Americans really don't want to hear it, or at least a good number. They simply don't want to hear it. I think a lot of them, their attitude is, long as I can survive, long as I can make it, why go back to that? Why talk about that? Because a wrong was done, and we deserve to get what we work for and what has been taken from us that has impacted us to this very day. In Cobra, an organization that has been advocating for reparations for many years, they say reparations is a process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people injured because of their group identity and in violation of their fundamental human rights by governments, corporations, institutions, and families. And that definition is loosely based on human international law, on UN law, on United Nations law. Okay? Now, if you're sitting there thinking, just leave it alone, let's move on, don't play the victim card. If you're sitting there thinking that, let me just point out to you that America has awarded other people reparations. For example, Japanese people for internment. Some black folks who were intentionally sterilized. Some other black folk who were given syphilis for study. The Rosewood, Florida massacre. These are some examples, and there are others, where America eventually, or some state or some city, said, okay, we can't deny this any longer, and they gave reparations. But think about the fact that America gave Japanese people reparations. They were not enslaved here. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have got reparations. I'm saying that we should get reparations. I'm not sitting here hating on Japanese people because they got reparations, because they were done wrong. They deserve reparations. My point is, we deserve reparations 1,000 times more than anyone who was not enslaved and built this country. That is my point. Now, there is some reparation talk and aspiration that is going on across the country. And it excites me. In a city outside of Chicago, Evanston, Illinois, the city of Evanston became the first documented governmental body in the country to enact a sustained policy of reparations for the harm done to black citizens. So Evanston, Illinois, is stepping up to the plate, acknowledging that the city did African Americans wrong, who live in this. It's a horrible story. Go read it. I don't have time to go over it, but they did such things as redlining, redlining blacks, relegating blacks to certain neighborhoods, police brutality, mass incarceration, all the typical stuff. So they're stepping up to the plate, and they're saying, okay, on our local level, we want to try to do the right thing. Now, I don't know the specifics of their reparations plan. I think certain people will get $25,000. I think that's a drop in the bucket, okay? A drop in the bucket, but it's a first step. It's a first step. All right? San Francisco, California. All right? In 2019, the San Francisco chapter of the NAACP challenged the San Francisco supervisors to pay blacks reparations for injustices. So the San Francisco chapter of the NAACP said to the city fathers, the supervisors, or more like the like either city councilmen or county commissioners. The NAACP said, why don't you all pay black people who moved to San Francisco because of the wrong San Francisco did to them? That was in 2019. In 2020, California was the first state to seat a formal commission on reparations, with Assembly Bill 3121 establishing the task force to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans. And I don't want to forget that since the 80s, H.R. 40, I believe it's H.R. 40, has been reintroduced to the U.S. House. It was reintroduced for years by the late Representative John Conyers of Detroit. And once he passed, Houston Representative Sheila Jackson Lee has picked it up, and she reintroduces it every couple of years. And all they're asking for is just to establish a commission, just to talk about it. Yet, the GOP votes it down every time. There's no other way to say it, but this is a wicked nation. It's an evil, wicked nation. It just is. I mean, let's pull the scab off of it. Let's tell the truth about it. It is a wicked, evil, hateful nation, especially toward African Americans. All right, back to San Francisco. On May 4th, 2021, San Francisco supervisors appointed 15 people to the San Francisco African American Reparations Advisory Committee, AARAC. In December 2022, just a few months ago, the AARAC released its final draft to the board. On March 14th, just a couple of weeks ago, 2023, San Francisco supervisors expressed a willingness to pay $5 million to every eligible black person who moved to San Francisco. Now, that's big. That's life-changing. That can, per person or per family, however it ends up being, that can make a substantial change for that family or for those persons. That's big. So this is happening on a small level, trickle down, trickle a little bit here, a little bit there, but it's happening. And we do see that most of it is happening in states other than the South, right? Northern states and cities, or South or Northwestern states and cities, or Southwestern states and cities. The South, this bastion of Confederacy, they're going to fight. But there was one place in the South here that I do want to bring to your attention. All right, so St. Louis, Missouri is another city that is looking at reparations. Providence, Rhode Island, another one. St. Paul, Minnesota, another one. Asheville, North Carolina. That is a southern state. It is considering reparations. That came out a couple of years ago. Boston, Massachusetts. I was a little surprised to see Boston because I can remember the way Boston fought integration and busing back in the 70s. I remember that. Tallahassee, Tallahassee, Oklahoma, which is not really a southern state, but it's right here. It's adjoining Texas. In Berkeley, California, very liberal state, very progressive city, not state, but city. So there are other cities that are considering reparations. It's a good thing, right? It's a good thing. All right, so finally, let me give you some resources. Several websites I want to refer you to. The NAARC.org. Probably the flagship organization for reparations. It's led by Dr. Ron Daniels and many other professionals who are really on top of things in terms of getting reparations done. And then InCobra, official InCobra online.org. They've been around for a long time. And then I want to refer you to a Facebook group that I created. It's called Time for Reparations. Just go to Facebook, search for Time for Reparations. Small group, but I created it because I wanted to bring attention to the issue of reparations. Books. The book that I've been quoting throughout this, From Here to Equality. Get that book. Excellent book. The 1619 Project. I had a white friend of mine to tell me, he said that he had read the 1619 Project, and he said that he did not know a lot of the things that were in that book, the 1619 Project. He did not know all the injustices that blacks have suffered in this country. This is what he told me. He was like, I don't know why we didn't learn this in history in high school. Well, I know why. You know, just look at Ron DeSantis. Look at the governor here, Greg Abbott. They don't want you to know what really happened. They don't want the word out. Okay? They are still trying to stop this reckoning that's going to happen. They can try all they want to stop it, but it's going to happen. I draw my strength and my faith and my hope and inspiration from the scriptures, from the Holy Scriptures. And when Egypt was trying to just destroy and subjugate Israel, the Bible says the more they grew, the more they developed and thrived. And that's what will happen with African Americans and has happened. A lesser constituted people would have died out. But we haven't died out. We've been fighting ever since because they brought us over here from Africa and we had a warring spirit. We have dealt with all kinds of things, but we have continued to fight and resist and protest and struggle to the point that we put a black man in the White House and now a black woman as the vice president of the United States of America. That's because, as they said, the more they oppress us, we still rise like a phoenix. So, I wanted to share with you and keep you updated, motivated, and fired up about reparations. They're not going anywhere. That's not going anywhere. I'm telling you, that's not going anywhere. We're going to keep fighting for reparations. Okay? We're going to keep fighting. All right? Listen, I'm out. Again, remember, this is Dr. King's unfortunate day that he was assassinated because he was talking the things that you hear me talking now. And what did they do? They assassinated him like they did Medgar Evers and so forth. So don't forget, read something tonight before you go to bed. Dr. King said, find a quote online. If you got a book of his, open it up and read a few pages. Or buy a book, The Love Community, and other books that he wrote. All right? And pray for our nation. You know, the first president, former president of the United States of America, is facing 34 felony counts. And there are still multiple investigations going on. And indictments could come from those as well. Our nation needs prayer. Prayer. Because perilous times are here. Perilous times. Pray also for Alvin Bragg, the DA there in Manhattan. You know, he is facing, not only did Trump make history, but he also made history in that he's the first prosecutor who happens to be black. And I know that gets under Trump's skin. Because remember, Trump called for the death of the Central Park Five. And here now, a black man, a black woman, Fannie Willis, a black woman, Attorney General Letitia James, are all trying to hold him accountable. And both Trump and his followers hate that. Folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan and many others. Pray for our nation. Listen, thank you for spending a few moments with me. I'm out of here. You be good. Peace. Love. Again, shout out to my son, Caleb. Happy birthday, Caleb. Love you, man. Bye.
Ever since I was a child, I've always hated bullies. I was that child. If I saw another kid getting picked on in class or at the lockers, I would stand up for that kid. I couldn't stand seeing bullying. But there was one incident with a teacher that almost silenced me. It is my first clear memory of racism and discrimination. It's still so vivid and clear in my head. I remember one day we were in class one afternoon, and there was some school pep rally going on. My teacher decided to hand paint butterflies and flowers on our faces in anticipation of the school event. So we all went one by one up to her so that she could paint our face. When it was my turn, mortified, embarrassed, and deeply ashamed. In that moment, even though I wanted to say something, I couldn't get the words out. So I walked back to my desk, I sat down, and I stared blankly at my desk until the bell rang. When I got home from school that day, my parents knew something was wrong. But I remember being so reluctant to tell them. I really don't know why. When I finally did, obviously they were furious. And let's just say the next day at school was one to remember. But this incident taught me a valuable lesson. It taught me to always stand up against racism, discrimination, and injustice. It fortified my resolve to fight for the vulnerable and voiceless. Just like my clients' voices are taken when they are wrongfully accused of a crime, subjected to banking while black, fighting for custody of their children, or fighting for just compensation from stingy insurance companies. My name is Attorney Chloe Corbett, also known as the Duchess of Justice. I am one half of Corbett & Corbett Law Firm and the Defiant Lawyers. We're here to fight for justice for the accused, the oppressed, the vulnerable, and the voiceless. You can find us in Dallas, Texas. Go to our website, www.corbettfirm.com. Improving lives and impacting laws.